Daniel had been walking for hours across the rocky surface of the forgotten planet. The air was thin, and every breath felt heavy. His boots crunched against the dust that had not been touched by life for centuries. The map in his hand showed a faint signal coming from deep beneath the ground. He followed it, hoping to find rare minerals or lost alien artifacts that could be sold for a good price. The entrance to the cave was almost hidden behind a wall of jagged rocks. A cold wind whistled through the narrow opening, carrying the smell of something. Old Daniel switched on his headlamp and stepped inside. The beam of light revealed walls covered in strange markings, each glowing faintly like the stars in a night sky. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was his own breathing. After several minutes, the narrow tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Daniel stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening. In the center of the room stood a crystal coffin, taller than him, glowing softly with a pale blue light. Dust floated in the air like tiny frozen sparks. The sight made his heart race. Because it was clear this was no ordinary grave, he approached slowly, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the crystal. Inside, a figure lay still, her body slender and her skin a faint shade of blue. Her hair was long, silver, and seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. She looked peaceful, almost as if she was only sleeping. Daniel felt an odd pull toward her, like some part of him knew her, even though he had never seen a being like her before. Around the base of the coffin were carvings in an alien language, the symbols twisted and curved like flowing water. He knelt down, tracing one with his finger, and a sudden hum filled the chamber. The crystal began to vibrate under his touch. Daniel stepped back, startled. A thin crack appeared across the coffin, spreading like a spider's web. Light poured from the gaps, growing brighter and warmer. It was as if the air itself had come. Alive with a sharp sound, the crystal split open. A rush of warm air escaped, carrying a scent he could not name, sweet and strange. The girl's chest rose slowly, her lips parting as if taking her first breath in thousands of years. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a glow like liquid silver. Daniel froze, unsure. If he should speak, the girl turned her head toward him, her gaze sharp yet full of confusion. She whispered something soft and melodic, but the words were unlike any language he knew. He took a cautious step closer, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The girl sat up slowly, her movements weak but graceful. She looked at her hands, then at him, studying every detail of his face. Her lips trembled as she spoke again. This time with urgency. Daniel shook his head. Trying to explain he could not understand, she frowned, glancing around the chamber as if searching for something. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Small stones fell from the ceiling. Clattering across the floor, the girl's eyes widened in fear, and she said a single word, sharp, clear, and filled with warning. Daniel didn't understand the meaning, but he understood the feeling: danger. From somewhere deep within the tunnels, a low metallic sound began to echo. It was rhythmic, like heavy footsteps, and it was getting closer. The girl moved toward him, grabbing his sleeve with surprising strength. She pointed toward a dark passage on the far side of the chamber, urging him to move. Daniel hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the open coffin. He felt the weight of the moment. Whatever he had done by opening it could not be undone. The metallic footsteps grew louder, joined by the sound of claws scraping against stone. Daniel realized they had no time to think. He nodded to the girl, and together they ran toward the dark passage. His headlamp's beams swung wildly, lighting glimpses of ancient walls and strange statues. Behind them, the sound of their pursuer grew faster. Closer, Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, and he could hear the girl's quick breathing beside him. They didn't know where the tunnel led, only that staying in the chamber meant certain danger. As they disappeared into the darkness, the chamber behind them glowed brighter for a moment. The crystal fragments began to hum again, as if alive and in the shadows beyond the entrance. A pair of red eyes appeared, watching them leave. Daniel kept running, his boots splashing through shallow puddles on the uneven floor. The girl stayed close, her cold fingers gripping his sleeve as if letting go meant death. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, forcing them to squeeze past sharp rocks and low ceilings. Every sound echoed, making it hard to tell if the footsteps behind them were closer or farther away. They reached a wider area where the air felt warmer. Strange blue crystals jutted from the walls, glowing softly. The girl stopped for a moment, touching one of the crystals with her palm. A faint hum filled the space, and Daniel noticed the light from the crystal seemed to respond to her touch. Brightening around her hand, she looked at him with urgency, speaking in her language again, slower this time, as if hoping he might understand. Daniel shook his head but pointed at himself and said his name. She tilted her head, repeating Danielle with careful pronunciation, then placed her hand on her chest and said a single word. It sounded like Alira. Her voice was soft, yet carried a strange strength. Daniel repeated it back, and her eyes lit up for a moment from deep behind them. A sharp, metallic screech cut through the silence. It made Daniel's skin crawl. Alira's expression hardened. She pointed ahead and started moving quickly. Daniel followed his flashlight. Beam dancing over alien carvings on the walls. The images showed tall figures, all female, holding glowing orbs. There were no males in the carvings, not one. The tunnel bent sharply and opened into another chamber, smaller than the last. At the center stood a pedestal with a strange device resting on it. It was a thin, curved band of metal, with small lights along the edge. Alira rushed toward it, her hands moving quickly over the surface as if she knew exactly what it was. Daniel stepped closer and saw alien symbols flash briefly before vanishing. Alira placed the band around her neck. The lights flickered, and then a small mechanical voice spoke in broken human words. Connect, link, speak, try. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing in focus. You, male. Human. The words were clumsy but understandable. Daniel froze, surprised she could now form some English. Yes. Human, he said slowly. Her gaze swept over him, as if studying every inch. No male. Long, long. She struggled for words, making gestures with her hands to show a long passage of time. 10,000. Cycles. Daniel didn't know what a cycle meant exactly, but her tone made it clear. It was a very long time. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. First. I see, she whispered, almost in awe, before Daniel could respond. A loud crash echoed through the tunnel they had come from. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Alira's hand shot out, gripping his arm tightly. Hunters, she said. This time the word was clear. They ran again. Moving through a narrow exit at the far end of the chamber, the passage sloped downward, and the air grew heavier. Each breath felt like it carried centuries of stillness. The sound of the hunters grew louder, mechanical, and relentless. Daniel dared a glance over his shoulder and saw a faint red glow moving through the darkness behind them. They came to a split in the tunnel. Alira hesitated for only a second before choosing the left path. Daniel followed without question, trusting her instinct. The tunnel opened into a space that looked almost like a hallway. The floor was smooth and strange. Vine-like patterns glowed along the walls. At the end of the hallway was a large door, sealed shut but with a round panel in the center. Alira placed her palm against it. A soft light scanned her hand, and the door slid open with a deep groan. They rushed inside, and it closed behind them with a heavy thud, sealing out the echo of the approaching hunters. Daniel looked around, trying to take in the strange room. The walls were covered in star maps and shifting symbols. In the middle was a raised platform with a control console. Alira walked toward it and touched the surface. Blue holograms appeared in the air, images of alien cities, towering spires, and endless crowds of women. But all of them seemed faded. Like memories from another age, she turned to him, her expression serious. "My people, gone," she said slowly. "Only sleep." "Wait." Her hand went to her chest. Last, Daniel's throat tightened. He realized he had not just awakened a stranger, but the last living member of an ancient race. A deep thud shook the walls. The hunters had found them again. Alira's voice became sharp. "Move." Now, she pointed toward another door at the far side. Smaller, but half hidden by a fallen beam, Daniel shoved the debris aside, his muscles burning. They slipped through just as the first heavy blow struck the sealed entrance. The new tunnel was darker, colder, and the floor was slick with moisture. The smell of old earth mixed with something metallic. Alira moved quickly, her bare feet making almost no sound. Daniel tried to match her pace, even though his legs ached. Behind them, the distant pounding grew fainter, but neither of them slowed. The path ahead was unknown. Yet Daniel felt something had already changed between them. He didn't understand her fully, but he understood her fear and the strange way her eyes lingered on him, as if she saw something impossible. The tunnel twisted once more, and far ahead, a faint blue glow appeared. Alira glanced at him with a look that held both relief and warning. Whatever waited beyond that light might be their only chance to escape, or the next danger they would have to face together. Daniel's boots splashed through shallow water as they moved toward the glow, each step echoing through the tunnel. Alira's breathing was fast, but steady. Her hand brushed the rough walls as if she could feel the path through touch alone. The glow ahead grew brighter, shifting between pale blue and deep green. When they emerged from the tunnel, Daniel stopped in awe. The space before them was massive, a hidden cavern that stretched so far he couldn't see the other side. Tall crystal pillars rose from the ground like frozen lightning, their light reflecting in the dark water that covered most of the floor. Alira stepped onto a narrow stone path that weaved between the water. She moved quickly, glancing back to make sure he followed. Daniel's eyes scanned the strange scene. The air felt alive here, like every breath carried energy. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a deep rumbling sound. They reached the center of the cavern, where a round platform stood. Faint symbols were etched into the stone, glowing as Alira stepped onto them. The crystals around the chamber pulsed in response. A low hum filled the air, and Daniel felt the hair on his arm stand up. Alira knelt by the center of the platform and pressed her palm against the stone. The carvings lit up brighter, and a beam of light shot upward, forming a shape in midair. Daniel stared as an image appeared, a tall alien woman dressed in flowing armor. Her face strong and regal. The image spoke in Alira's language, her voice deep and commanding. Alira answered quickly, her tone urgent. She pointed at Daniel. Several times during the exchange, the holographic figure's gaze shifted to him, her expression unreadable. Then the light flickered and vanished. Alira turned to him. "Guardian, protect me," she said slowly, pointing to her chest. Then to him, "Hunters, no stop. Until we gone." Her voice carried a weight that made Daniel's chest tighten. He didn't know why these machines wanted her dead, but it was clear they wouldn't stop. The water around the platform rippled. Daniel's hand went to his weapon instantly. Shapes were moving beneath the surface. Then one broke through, a massive mechanical creature, its body shaped like a sleek predator. Red eyes burning in its metal skull. It landed on the stone path with a crash, sending shards of rock into the air. Alira grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a side path. The machine roared, the sound metallic and hollow. Daniel fired a shot. the blast hitting its armor and sparking. But the thing barely slowed. They ran, their feet pounding against the slick stone, the sound of the machine's claws scraping behind them. The path twisted sharply and ended at a stone archway. Beyond it was another tunnel, but the ceiling was low and covered in jagged rock. They squeezed through, Daniel's back scraping against the wall. Behind them, the machine tried to follow, but became stuck, its claws snapping at the air. They didn't stop until the sound faded into the distance. The tunnel sloped upward, the air growing warmer. A faint golden light appeared ahead, different from the crystal glow when they stepped out. Daniel blinked against the brightness. They were now in what looked like a ruined underground city. Stone towers leaned at odd angles, and broken bridges hung over dark pits. The air was thick with dust, but here and there, faint lights still glowed. Alira stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the ruins with an expression Daniel couldn't read. "This home," she said quietly. Her voice trembling, she stepped forward. Touching a broken wall as if it were something precious, Daniel followed, feeling the silence press in on them. Every shadow seemed to watch. Every sound seemed too loud. A sudden crash echoed across the city. Daniel spun toward the sound. On a distant bridge, several dark shapes appeared, tall and moving fast. The hunters had found them again. Alira's eyes widened. She grabbed his hand without hesitation and pulled him toward a narrow street between the ruins. They ran past crumbling buildings and through archways draped in vines. The ground shook with the weight of the machines chasing them. Daniel's lungs burned, but he pushed himself to keep up. Alira's grip was firm, and even in her panic, she moved like she knew every turn. They reached a round plaza where a strange structure stood, a tall pillar with a glowing core. Alira stopped, speaking quickly in her own tongue, then pointed at the core. "Power. Open." "Gate," she said. Daniel nodded, understanding she wanted him to help. Together they pushed at a metal panel, revealing old controls. The hunter's footsteps grew louder, metal grinding against stone. Daniel worked the controls, pressing buttons at random until something clicked. The core flared with bright light, sending a pulse through the ground. Far ahead, a massive door built into the rock began to open slowly. Alira looked at him with determination. "We go now," she said. The hunters burst into the plaza just as they started running. The machine's red eyes locked on them, their bodies moving with terrifying speed. Daniel and Alira sprinted toward the opening gate, the sound of the machines closing in like a storm at their heels. The gap was just wide enough when they reached it. They dove through, the heavy stone door sliding shut behind them with a final scent. The final echoing boom, sealing the darkness and the hunters. On the other side, the tunnel beyond was silent, but Daniel knew the danger wasn't over. The look in Alira's eyes told him the same thing. Whatever lay ahead might be even worse than what they'd just escaped. The tunnel stretched ahead, narrow and damp. Droplets of water fell from the ceiling, echoing in the silence. Daniel's footsteps sounded heavy compared to Alira's light movements. She walked close to the wall, her fingers brushing the stone as if feeling for hidden signs. The air was warmer here, but it carried a faint metallic taste. They walked for several minutes before the walls began to change. Smooth stone gave way to panels of alien metal carved with intricate designs. Faint blue lines of light ran through them like veins. Daniel reached out and touched one. It was warm, almost alive. Alira glanced back at him, her silver eyes reflecting the glow. She said a word he didn't understand, but her tone made it clear this place was important. The tunnel opened into a massive, circular chamber. The ceiling high above was lost in shadow. In the center stood a huge stone table, its surface covered with carvings, strange objects, and fragments of crystal. Daniel stepped closer. The carvings showed tall alien women standing together, holding spears and glowing orbs. In every image, they faced some kind of shadowy figure. But there were never any males. Alira moved to the far side of the table. Her hand hovering over a small device, she pressed it, and the chamber lit up with blue holograms. Daniel's eyes widened as entire scenes unfolded around him, great cities floating above oceans. Armies of women in shining armor and a sky filled with warships. Then the images changed, showing chaos, fires, and the collapse of towers. Alira spoke slowly, her words halting but clear enough for him to piece together. We, strong. Before, but, plague. She paused, pressing her hand to her heart. No male. All gone, she pointed to herself. Sleep. Until safe. Awaken. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He was standing in the presence of the last living. Piece of an entire civilization, he asked softly. Why me? But she only tilted her head, as if not fully understanding. Then she said, You. Only one. And something in her voice made his stomach tighten. The walls trembled suddenly. Dust falling from above, the sound of grinding metal echoed from the tunnel they had come through. Alira's head snapped toward the noise. Hunters. Follow, she whispered, her voice sharp. Daniel's hand went to his weapon. But she was already moving toward another door on the far side of the chamber. They pushed through into a smaller room, lined with tall glass cylinders. Most were cracked or empty, but a few still glowed faintly. Inside them were shapes, female figures, lifeless and still, preserved in strange fluid. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Your people? He asked. She nodded, her eyes lowering. All cannot wake. From the wall behind the cylinders, a sudden glow spread, a thin vertical line widening into a doorway. Beyond it lay a dark staircase leading down. Alira gestured for him to follow. They descended quickly, their footsteps echoing. In the spiral stairwell, the air growing colder with every step. At the bottom was another chamber, but this one was different. It felt older. The walls carved with deeper symbols. At the center stood a large pedestal with a sphere resting on it. Faint golden lights swirled inside the sphere. Alira approached slowly, almost reverently. She placed her hands on either side of it, and the light grew brighter. Daniel watched as her expression changed, a mix of awe and sorrow. The sphere began to project images onto the walls. This time Daniel saw them clearly. They showed the plague sweeping through her people, women crying out in despair as every male collapsed. The sky turning red as war began between surviving clans. Then, a great sealing ceremony where Alira was placed into the crystal coffin he had found. The images faded, and she turned to him, her voice soft but steady. You. Wake me. You, first male, in. Forever. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on his. Now, you hunted, because you can change. Daniel didn't fully understand, but the weight in her voice told him it was the truth. A distant crash shook the floor beneath them, dust raining from the ceiling. The hunters had found another way. In Alira's eyes hardened, she grabbed the sphere, tucking it under her arm. Go, she said firmly. Daniel followed her through a narrow passage that led away from the chamber. The walls here were closer, the floor uneven. Every step they took sent small echoes ahead of them. Somewhere far off, Daniel heard the metallic scrape of claws, but it was hard to tell from which direction it came. The air grew hotter. A faint red glow lighting the end of the tunnel. When they stepped out, Daniel stopped. They were standing on a narrow ledge overlooking an underground chasm. Far below, rivers of molten rock flowed slowly, lighting the cavern with a hellish glow. A single bridge of black stone stretched across to another tunnel, wide enough for only one person at a time. Alira didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the bridge, her balance perfect, even as heat waves rose from below. Daniel followed carefully, the rock under his boots hot to the touch. Halfway across, a sharp metallic cry echoed behind them. Daniel turned just in time to see two hunters emerge from the shadows. Their red eyes locked on him. The machines began to move, their heavy bodies making the bridge shake with every step. Daniel glanced at Alira, and in her eyes he saw the same determination he felt neither of them could stop now. Not here. Not with the abyss below. They pushed forward, the heat rising, the hunters closing in. And the end of the bridge still too far away. The bridge trembled under their feet, each step sending small flakes of black stone tumbling into the glowing rivers far below. The heat was suffocating, wrapping around Daniel like a burning blanket. Alira's silver hair clung to her skin, damp with sweat. But her movements remained quick and precise. She didn't look back. The sound of claws scraped against the stone, louder and closer. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder. The hunters were halfway across now, their metal legs digging into the bridge with sharp points. Glowing cracks spread where they stepped. The machines were heavy, far heavier than the stone could bear. "Alira?" he shouted, pointing to the growing cracks. She turned her head, her eyes narrowing as she understood. Without speaking, she pushed herself to move faster, her bare feet almost silent against the stone. Daniel followed, his legs burning with effort, the air shimmering with heat from the molten rock below. They were 3/4 across when the bridge gave a deep groan. A section behind them crumbled away. One hunter dropped instantly into the glowing river, its body sinking in two. The molten rock with a hiss. The other didn't stop. It leaped forward, landing hard enough to make the rest of the bridge shake violently. Daniel stumbled, but kept moving. The creature let out a metallic roar, extending long, razor-sharp limbs toward him. He ducked, feeling the wind of its strike pass over his head. His hand went to his weapon, but firing here could shatter the fragile bridge beneath them. Alira reached the end first, jumping onto solid ground. She spun around, her hands moving over the panel of a strange device built into the wall. Daniel realized she was trying to activate something. The hunter lunged again, its claws nearly catching his shoulder. He dodged sideways, a chunk of stone breaking loose. Under his boots, the bridge shook one last time, and Daniel leaped forward with all his strength, landing beside Alira just as the remaining section of the bridge collapsed into the glowing abyss. The hunter tried to jump after them, but the stone beneath its feet gave way. It fell screaming into the molten depths, vanishing in a burst of sparks. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing and the distant rumble of the molten rivers. Alira stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his arm. "Safe for now," she said softly, but her eyes betrayed no relief. The tunnel ahead sloped upward, cooler air seeping in from somewhere far above. They moved quickly, Daniel keeping his weapon ready. The walls here were rougher, as if this passage had been carved in haste. Patches of moss clung to the stone, glowing faintly in shades of green and blue. They emerged into a vast underground chamber. But unlike the others, this one was filled with ancient machines, their shapes strange and elegant, covered in dust and cobwebs. Alira walked among them slowly, her fingers brushing over their smooth surfaces. "Old ships," she murmured. Daniel realized they were small spacecraft, long abandoned, their hulls cracked but still intact. Alira stopped beside one larger than the rest. She pressed her hand to a panel, and with a groan, the ship's door slid open. Stale air rushed out. Daniel stepped inside behind her. The interior was dark but dry, lined with strange seats and panels. Symbols glowed faintly on the control board. "This, go far," she said, her voice carrying both hope and hesitation. Daniel understood immediately she meant escape, but before they could speak further, A low hum began to fill the chamber. It wasn't coming from the ship, it was coming from the walls. Illyra's eyes widened. She grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward the back of the ship from the shadows of the chamber. New figures began to appear, not hunters, but tall, slender machines with glowing blue eyes instead of red. They moved slower, their steps deliberate. Daniel could feel no aggression from them, but their presence was unsettling. One stopped in front of the ship's ramp, tilting its head as if studying him. Then it spoke in a voice that was both mechanical and ancient. "You are the anomaly." The words were perfect, clear English. Daniel froze, his mind racing. The machine's gaze shifted to Illyra. "Last of your line. You have awakened." Its voice carried no emotion. But the weight of the statement filled the air. Illyra stepped forward. Speaking quickly in her own language, the machine listened. In silence before responding, "Your time is short." The old enemy stirs. Daniel wanted to ask what that meant, but before he could, a deafening explosion shook the chamber. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling. One of the sidewalls cracked open, and a blinding red light poured through. The hunters had found another way in. The blue-eyed machines moved instantly. Stepping between Illyra, Daniel, and the advancing hunters, beams of energy shot from their arms, striking the red-eyed machines and sending them crashing to the ground. Daniel didn't wait. He turned to Illyra. "We need to go now." She nodded, sprinting into the ship's cockpit. The controls lit up under her touch, the hum of the engines filling the air. Daniel strapped himself into one of the strange seats. The ship shook as debris rained down outside. One last, heavy impact made the floor shudder. Then, with a sudden burst of force, the ship lifted from the ground. The chamber fell away beneath them, the molten glow and the battle of machines fading into the darkness below. Daniel looked at Illyra, her hands steady on the controls, her eyes fixed ahead. Whatever lay above ground was still unknown. But he knew one thing. Their fight had only just begun. The ship burst out of the cavern mouth like a silver arrow, rock and dust scattering in its wake. Daniel blinked at the sudden brightness. The sky above was a swirling mix of deep blue and streaks of violet, strange clouds rolling in unnatural patterns. Illyra adjusted the controls with swift, precise movements, her eyes locked forward. The landscape below stretched endlessly, vast plains of silver grass waving under the wind. In the distance, the ruins of towering structures pierced the horizon, their jagged edges reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. Daniel had never seen anything like it. It was beautiful and unsettling at the same time. The ship climbed higher. But a sudden alarm echoed in the cockpit. Red symbols flashed across the panels. Illyra's hands moved. Quickly, her voice sharp, following. U.S. Daniel leaned forward, scanning the skies behind them. Dark shapes emerged from the clouds. Sleek black crafts, moving in tight formation. "They're not the hunters," Daniel said, his voice low, but the sense of danger was clear. These ships were faster, smoother, and carried a deadly grace. Illyra's expression hardened. "Old enemy," she said. Gripping the controls tighter, the black craft spread out, surrounding them in a loose circle. Daniel could see the glint of weapons beneath their wings. "They're trying to box us in," he muttered. Illyra gave a single nod, then banked hard to the left, the ship dipping dangerously close to the ground. The plains below rushed past, silver grass blurring into a sea of motion. The black ships followed with ease, their formation tightening. One broke ahead, firing a beam of blue energy that scorched the earth just meters in front of them. Daniel's hand went to the strange weapon he had found earlier. But firing from inside the ship wouldn't help. Illyra glanced at him, her voice quick and urgent. "Hold." She pressed a sequence on the controls, and part of the ship's hull shifted. panels sliding open to reveal hidden cannons with a hum of power. They lit up and fired, bursts of white light streaking through the sky. One of the enemy ships exploded in a bright flash, the others scattered briefly before regrouping, their movements sharp and disciplined. Daniel could tell these were not machines acting on programming. There was intelligence behind every turn, every attack. Alira pulled the ship upward sharply, the sudden force pressing Daniel into his seat. They shot through the clouds, the world turning into a misty blur. For a moment, the enemy ships were gone. Hidden by the thick clouds, Daniel started to speak. But Alira raised her hand for silence. Then he heard it, the low hum of engines above them. She jerked the ship sideways just as a beam of energy tore through the cloud where they had been a second before. They broke through the cloud cover into a sky filled with floating rock formations, massive chunks of stone hanging in the air as if gravity had forgotten them. Waterfalls cascaded from their edges, disappearing into mist far below. Alira darted between the rocks, weaving through narrow gaps, forcing the black ships to split their formation. One enemy craft clipped the edge of a floating stone and spun out of control, vanishing into the mist, but the others stayed on them. Daniel could feel the heat of their weapons as another beam grazed their left wing. Alarms blaring again, Alira's jaw tightened. "We can't fight long," she said. Daniel scanned the strange terrain ahead, spotting a massive rock with a gaping hole at its center. There. He pointed. Alira steered toward it without hesitation. The enemy followed, but the tunnel inside the rock was narrow and twisting. Their speed made every turn a gamble. Light flashed behind them as two of the black ships collided with the rock walls, leaving only one still in pursuit. They shot out the other side of the tunnel. The sudden brightness almost blinding. Ahead lay a hidden valley, lush and green. Surrounded by sheer cliffs, Alira guided the ship down, skimming the treetops before landing in a clearing. The moment they touched the ground, she shut off the engines. Silence settled over them except for the distant calls of strange birds. They stayed still for a long moment, listening, but no engines followed. Daniel unstrapped himself and stepped outside. The air here was fresh and cool. The ground soft beneath his boots. Alira joined him, her eyes scanning the forest. "Safe for now," she said, though her voice carried little comfort. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone pillar, covered in moss and vines, strange symbols carved deep into its surface. Alira approached it slowly, her fingers tracing the marks, her lips moving as she read in her own language. Daniel asked quietly, "What is it?" She turned to him, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "Old place. Before war. Before plague." She stepped closer to him, holding his gaze. "Here." Truth. Before Daniel could ask what she meant, the pillar gave a low hum. The ground beneath them vibrated, and a circle of light formed around its base. The air shimmered, and shapes began to appear. Not enemies, not machines, but ghostly figures of her people, standing tall and silent, their eyes fixed on Daniel as if they had been waiting for him all along. The ghostly figures stood in a perfect circle, their translucent forms shimmering in the light from the pillar. Their faces were calm yet unreadable, their silver eyes locked on Daniel. He felt the weight of their gaze, like they were looking not just at him, but through him, searching for something hidden deep inside. Alira stepped forward first, bowing her head slightly to the figures. She spoke in her language, her voice steady but low. The figures responded in unison, their words like a single breath of wind. Daniel couldn't understand them, but the sound sent a strange shiver through his body. One figure, taller than the rest, stepped closer, its hand lifting toward Daniel. Though it was made of light, he could feel the warmth from it. The ghost spoke in perfect English. "Human. Bearer of the seed." Daniel's brows furrowed. He glanced at Alira, who met his eyes with a look that was both proud and sorrowful. "They know," she said softly, "you can bring life." Again, Daniel felt his stomach tightened, the words sinking in. It wasn't just about him finding her. It wasn't chance. The ghosts had been waiting for a male, any male, for 10,000 years, and now he was here. The tall figure gestured toward the pillar. The glowing symbols shifted, forming images in the air. Daniel saw Alira's people before the plague. Entire cities alive with light, families walking together, laughter echoing through the streets. Then the darkness came, the plague sweeping through. Men falling, women screaming, and the skies burning with war. The images faded, replaced by a single crystal coffin, the same one Daniel had found her in. She. Last hope, the figure said. You. Last chance. Daniel felt the weight of the words settled like stone on his chest. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was the future of an entire species. Alira stepped beside him, placing her hand on his arm. Hunter's enemy. "They know too," she said. "They will not stop." As if to prove her point, the ground shook violently, a deep, mechanical roar echoing through the valley. The shadows at the forest's edge began to move. From the trees emerged the shapes of hunters, their red eyes burning in the dim light, dozens of them, moving with deadly precision behind them. The sound of engines filled the air. The black ships had found the valley. The ghostly figures did not move in fear. Instead, they raised their hands, beams of light shooting upward from their palms. Forming a shimmering dome over the clearing, the hunters stopped at the edge, their claws scraping against the invisible barrier. The tall ghost turned back to Daniel. "We can hold them." For moments only, its voice was calm but urgent. "Take her to the starship in the cliffs. Leave this world, or all will end." Alira's eyes widened. She knew the place. Without hesitation, she grabbed his hand, pulling him toward a narrow path leading out of the clearing. The ghosts held the barrier as the hunters pounded against it, cracks of red energy spreading across its surface. They ran through the forest, branches whipping past, the roar of engines overhead growing louder. Daniel's lungs burned, but he didn't slow. Alira was fast, her grip on his hand unyielding. The path ended at the base of a sheer cliff, half covered in vines. Alira pressed her palm against a flat section of stone, and with a deep groan, a hidden door slid open. Inside was a small starship, sleek and silver, dust coating its surface, but its form intact. She rushed inside, Daniel close behind the controls. Lit up under her touch, the hum of old but powerful engines filling the chamber. Outside, the first hunters broke through the barrier, their mechanical cries echoing across the valley. The black ships descended through the clouds, weapons charging. Daniel strapped himself in as Alira's hands flew over the controls. The ship rose from the ground, vines tearing free from its hull. A beam of energy from one of the black ships streaked past, scorching the cliffside. Alira twisted the ship sharply, dodging another blast. The valley shrank below them, the ghosts still standing in the clearing, their light dimming but unbroken. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized they were sacrificing themselves to give them a chance. They broke through the cloud layer, the black ships still in pursuit. But Alira's voice was steady. "Once, we in void." "They stop." She pushed the engines harder, the stars beginning to pierce the darkness above. Daniel looked at her, the silver glow in her eyes stronger now. "You trust me?" he asked. She held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "I woke. Because of you." Her voice was soft, but her words carried more weight than anything he'd heard before. The stars stretched into lines as the ship jumped to faster than light. Travel, the black ships vanishing behind them, the planet falling away into the darkness of space. In the silence that followed, Daniel and Alira sat side by side. The future uncertain, but one truth clear: their journey was far from over.